Hey there. Forget the bedtime legends you were handed as a kid. The truth is darker, quieter, too. The kind of dark that does not jump out and scream, but sits beside you and breathes, patiently, until you notice you are shivering. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere the wind never really stops, somewhere a man lies down knowing his own breath will freeze in his beard, knowing the only fire he can afford is a handful of dry dung that glows like a tired ember, knowing that inside a canvas tent, frost can form above his face and then fall like silent snow onto his blankets. If you find a strange kind of peace in this shadowed history, you can leave a like or subscribe, the way you might toss one more stick onto a small fire. No rush, no pressure, just a quiet gesture, if it feels right. Now, let the room around you soften. If you can, dim the lights. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Let your tongue rest behind your teeth. Feel the weight of your body meeting whatever is holding you up. Bed, couch, pillow, gravity itself. Slow your breath down until it is almost bored. I am sitting close to the fireplace as I tell this, and the flames are small, the way a working fire should be. They crackle in short sentences. They keep their secrets. I like that. It reminds me of the winter camps on the American frontier, where the fire was never a celebration. It was a tool, a little orange eye in the darkness that said, here is where you are, and here is where you might survive until morning. You know that feeling, when the day has been long and your body is tired, in a deep, honest way, but your mind still wants to wander? Cowboys knew it well. They lived inside that feeling for months. When winter came, sleep was not rest the way we like to imagine it. Sleep was endurance. It was the work that happened after the work. Picture the end of a day out on open range. The light drains away slowly, as if the sky is reluctant to leave. The last strip of sun slides behind a low ridge, and the land turns to iron blue. Grass stops looking like grass and becomes a single dark texture, a pelt stretched to the horizon. A horse shifts its weight, and the sound of its hoof scraping frozen ground carries farther than it should. Cold air does that. It carries sound like it carries scent, thin and clean and sharp. A man stands there, shoulders hunched, not dramatic, not heroic, just practical. His coat is stiff where yesterday's sleet dried. His gloves have that hard, dry crackle when he flexes his fingers. He looks at the ground the way you might look at a door you do not want to open but must, because the ground is where he will sleep, not on a mattress, not on a floorboard, on earth that has been freezing all day and will keep freezing through the night, drawing heat the way a thirsty thing draws water. There is a strange intimacy to that. Truly, I always find it lingers in my mind. A human body pressed to the planet, trying to keep a few degrees of warmth for itself, while the world around it does not care at all. Winter out there was not one kind of cold. It was many. In southern Texas, it could be a dry cold, the kind that makes your lips split if you lick them too much. The air stays clear, the sky sharp with stars, and the ground freezes hard but mostly dry. Farther north, through the territories that used to be called Oklahoma and Kansas, winter is wetter, meaner in its own way. Rain comes with sleet. Snow falls and melts and falls again. Mud forms ridges, freezes into ugly wrinkles, then thaws just enough to turn every step into a slow pull. And then there are the high plains, Wyoming, Montana, places where 20 below is not a story. It is a number you live with, the kind of cold that makes metal burn your skin, the kind that turns a canteen to ice even when you keep it close, tucked like a secret under your coat. A man's breath can crust on his mustache. His eyelashes can gather tiny white beads that glitter when the firelight catches them. Cowboys worked in all of it. Trail drives pushed herds north in spring. Then again with seasons, grass, market prices. Weather did not ask permission. A late snowstorm could slap a crew in May. An early freeze could lock the ground before the fall work was finished. When the weather turned, there was no stopping. The herd moved. The men moved with it. That is a simple sentence, but it holds a lot of quiet fear. Because moving means you cannot choose comfort. You cannot wait for a warmer night. You cannot bargain with the sky. Sometimes the work was a line camp. One man, maybe two, sent out to a remote station on a vast ranch. 6 weeks, sometimes more. Riding out each day to check fences, search for cattle in trouble, track signs in snow and mud, then returning at night to the same small shelter, the same routine, the same cold bedroll, waiting like an old argument you have to have again. Other times it was a roundup outfit, a temporary camp that moved every few days, men sleeping in a different cold spot each night, always arriving near dark, always leaving again before the sun could help much. I want you to feel how thin that barrier was. Canvas and wool. That is what stood between a warm-blooded body and a frozen world. Not much, by modern measures, yet it was what existed. What could be carried on horseback? What could be repaired with rough stitches and stubbornness? Before we go deeper, listen for a moment. Imagine the night sound of the prairie. Not romantic music, just the small noises that keep you company. Wind worrying at grass, a horse snorting in the dark, the faint clink of a buckle as metal contracts in the cold, the fire, low and busy, making little popping sounds like it is counting time. This story is not about a single famous gunfight or a shining outlaw. It is about the anti-hero most people forget, the working cowboy, who did not win anything except another morning, and even that morning came at a cost. So let us start where his shelter starts. He carries his bed on his horse. They called it a bedroll, sometimes a hot roll, sometimes a sugan when it had extra quilting. When it is rolled up tight behind a saddle, it looks almost like a burden too heavy for its purpose, a thick cylinder of canvas with rope bites pressed into it. When he drops it to the ground, it lands with a dull thud, and a puff of dry dust lifts, then settles again as if tired. Inside are wool blankets, 3, sometimes 4, if he can afford them, if his horse can carry the weight without souring. They are not soft, they are not pretty, they are gray or brown, coarse against the fingertips. Some are military surplus, the kind that once belonged to soldiers who also learned that sleep can be endurance. Wool was chosen for a reason. It holds warmth even when damp. It can drink moisture and still keep working. That mattered because winter camps were wet in ways people do not always picture. Not just snow, but the slow damp of breath, the sweat that cools, the frost that melts when the sun finally touches it. But wool has a cost. It grows heavy with that moisture, day by day. A blanket that was 5 pounds when dry can become 7, 8, and after a week of cold nights with no real chance to dry, a whole bedroll can gain 10 or 15 pounds just from holding water in its fibers. Imagine carrying that behind you all day, feeling it tug at the saddle strings, feeling it sway when your horse steps into a hole. It is a quiet kind of punishment, a tax paid in weight. Around the wool is canvas, duck canvas, heavy like wagon covers, treated with wax or oil, sometimes linseed, rubbed in by hand until the fabric feels stiff and smells faintly of something earthy and old. It is not truly waterproof, not the way we would demand today, but it sheds some moisture, blocks some wind. Under the blankets it acts as a ground cloth, keeping the wool from direct contact with mud, snow, dung, whatever the earth offers. Over the blankets it folds like an envelope, a shell that tries to keep a pocket of warmer air around a body. The way a man packs it matters. He learns that quickly. Roll it loose and it sags behind the saddle, shifts, rubs, becomes a nuisance that can turn into danger. Roll it tight and it rides better. Tight also means fewer air pockets, fewer places for frost to settle while it is strapped out in the open. Tight means he can untie it in failing light with cold fingers and not curse too loudly. I have always found that detail so human. The knots, the buckles, the way cold turns simple tasks into slow ones. A complex knot that looks clever in daylight becomes a small tragedy at dusk, when your hands are numb and you can barely feel the rope. So men chose ties that were simple, secure, quick. They designed their whole evening around the fact that the world would be dark and their fingers would be stupid with cold. Some men tucked small things into the folds of the bedroll, an extra shirt rolled tight, maybe a pair of dry socks if he had them, a rare luxury, a letter, folded and wrapped in oilcloth, a tiny photograph that could be touched like a charm, tobacco, protected from damp. The bedroll was the closest thing to private space a cowboy had. Everything else was shared, exposed, public. The bedroll held the smell of him. Wool that has been damp and re-dried many times develops an odor, strong, not entirely unpleasant, just close and lived in, like a saddle room. And still, there is a moment, each evening, when he opens it, shakes out the blankets, and the cold air trapped inside releases like a sigh. You can almost hear it, a soft whoosh, a tiny shift in temperature near his knees. He stands there in the half-light, trying to decide where to lay it, trying to read the ground and the wind like an old language, because choosing where to sleep is the first defense against winter, and winter does not forgive mistakes. So he studies the land the way a sailor studies the sea. Wind first. Always wind. You can feel it on your cheeks before you hear it. It slides across the prairie, looking for any gap in clothing, any loose flap of canvas, any little mistake. A camp in the open means wind worrying at you all night, stealing heat from your collarbones, from the thin skin of your wrists. Windbreaks were rare. Sometimes there is a low rise in the land, and he will angle toward it, because even a small hump can disrupt the worst of the wind at ground level. Sometimes there is a shallow draw, a dry creek bed with banks 5 feet high. The air down there can feel calmer, as if the world is holding its breath. But a draw has its own trap. Cold air sinks. At night, the cold collects in low places like water. Camp too low, and you wake in a bowl of cold, a pocket where the temperature feels several degrees worse than it should. I always find that detail unsettling, honestly. The idea that cold has geography. Water matters too. Horses need it. Coffee needs it. A man needs it, even if he pretends he does not. A creek or spring is necessary, and also risky. Moisture hangs around water. It seeps into canvas and wool. Damp, in winter, is the quiet assassin. He balances it. Close enough to water that he can find it in the dark, but far enough up a slope that he is not sleeping right in the cold sink. 50 yards can matter. Then he looks at the ground. In daylight, rocks look harmless. At night, beneath a bedroll, a rock the size of your fist becomes a small torture device. You shift to escape it, and each shift lets cold air slide in where warmth was starting to collect. So he kicks stones away. He clears sticks. He chooses the least bad patch he can find. And the light is fading. That is the pressure behind every decision. The sun is leaving, and with it the small mercy of warmth. His fingers are already losing skill. His ears begin to ache. That dull burn that comes before numbness. He has maybe 30 minutes of usable light. He has to commit. He sets down his saddle carefully, because a saddle is expensive. Then he unrolls his bed, canvas first, laid flat like a dull brown skin. The sound it makes is dry and crisp in the cold. Wool blankets come next, shaken out with short snaps that send tiny dust motes into the air. He does not lie down yet. He is still standing, still working, still trying to create a small pocket of order in a world that wants everything to freeze. And this, right here, is the beginning of the night. He cups his hands and brings a match to life. The flame is tiny, almost embarrassed, and he shields it from the wind with his palm like he is protecting a fragile thought. It catches a twist of dry grass, then transfers itself to the first chip of fuel. Smoke rises for a breath, then the breeze leans it sideways. He watches, patient, waiting for that first steady glow. When it arrives, it is not comfort. It is a signal, permission to stop moving and let the night begin. The fire takes a while to decide what it wants to be. At first, it is all smoke and argument. The fuel does not catch cleanly. A gust comes, the flame flattens, and for a second he thinks it will die. Then it returns, stubborn, licking along the edge of a chip, finding the dry heart inside. Little orange tongues appear, vanish, appear again. He crouches close, careful not to let his coat brush the flame. The heat is weak, but it feels enormous against wind-stung skin. It is almost embarrassing how grateful a person can feel for something so small. He builds it the way you build hope, when you cannot afford much of it. One piece, then another, always leaving space for air, because a fire smothered by its own hunger is just a pile of warm disappointment. He uses the tip of a stick to nudge things into place. The stick is rough in his glove, the bark gritty, and when it warms near the coals, it releases a faint resin smell, sharp and clean for a moment. If all he has is buffalo chips, the smell is different. It is not foul, it is just animal and honest, and it tells you what kind of country this is. Once there is a small bed of coals. He does what every tired man does. He makes coffee. Not because he needs caffeine, not at night. It is ritual. It is warmth that goes inside instead of just touching your hands. He takes a blackened pot from a saddlebag's fold, its handle polished by years of fingers. If the water source is not frozen solid, he ladles some. If it is frozen, he chips at ice with the heel of his knife, listening to that brittle crack, watching shards tumble like glass into the pot. The water will taste a little of river or pond, a little of metal if the pot is old, a little of smoke by the end. He sets the pot near the heat, not on top at first, because a hard boil wastes fuel and stirs up ash. He waits. Waiting becomes part of the night, waiting for water to warm, waiting for the horse to settle, waiting for the wind to choose a direction and keep it for at least an hour, waiting for his own muscles to stop complaining. This is the moment where loneliness shows itself. I mean real loneliness, not the dramatic kind. The kind that arrives quietly when the tasks slow down. When your hands are busy, you can almost forget you are alone. When the work pauses, there is space for thoughts to step in. And thoughts, in winter, can feel colder than the air. He sits on his heels for a bit, then shifts to sit cross-legged, then stretches one leg out, because the ground hurts, and also because stillness invites the cold into joints. He watches the fire. He listens. He tries to name the sounds. That distant, faint creak could be a tree, if there are any. It could be leather shrinking. It could be the horse adjusting a hind hoof. The mind keeps a small catalog of threat and non-threat, like a quiet clerk working in a freezing office. His rifle rests nearby, not because he expects a fight, but because the world includes things with teeth, wolves in some places, coyotes almost everywhere, a stray dog, a man you do not know. Out on a line camp, the most dangerous animal was sometimes another human being, someone looking for beef to steal, someone hiding from law, someone desperate. You can hear footsteps in dry grass from farther away than you think. You can hear them and still not know if you are imagining it, because wind makes ghosts. When the water finally shivers and steams, he dumps in coffee, loose grounds, dark as soil. The smell rises and wraps around his face. It is a small miracle how that scent can make a cold place feel briefly like a home. He pours it into a tin cup, and the metal bites his lip at first. He huffs into it, watching steam curl. Then he drinks. Bitter, hot, comforting, in a rough way. After coffee, There is the business of sleep, which is never only sleep. If he has a canvas pup tent, he sets it up with movements that have become muscle memory. The canvas is stiff, and when he pulls it, it snaps in the cold like a sail. Stakes do not want to go into frozen ground. He hammers them with a rock, each hit sending a little shock up his arm. Sometimes he has to place rocks on the tent edges instead, building a low wall. He tightens ropes. He checks knots. He checks them again. A loose line becomes a flapping sound all night, and flapping is the noise that steals sleep one thin slice at a time. If he has no tent, he makes a bed in the open, and that choice changes everything. Under open sky, you can see the stars, bright and sharp in winter, the Milky Way like spilled ash across black velvet. Beautiful, yes, and also indifferent. The stars do not care if a man wakes with his fingers numb. They do not care if he misjudges the weather and a sudden squall drives snow into his face. They are just there, watching. He lays his canvas ground cloth. He places the blankets. He folds the top canvas over like an envelope. Some men used a tarp, some an old wagon sheet. If it has holes, he tries to position them away from where snow might drift. He places his boots where he can find them. That matters. In the dark, you do not want to be crawling around looking for boots while your feet lose heat. He loosens the laces. He does not take them off immediately. That is another lesson. If you take boots off too soon, your feet cool too fast, and the moment you try to put them back on later, it feels like forcing your feet into boards. So he waits, letting his feet cool gradually. Then he slips the boots off and tucks them under the edge of his bedroll, sometimes under his knees, sometimes under his hips, because if they freeze hard overnight, you can be in real trouble. Boots are not just footwear. They are mobility. They are the difference between walking and limping, between reaching the horse and not reaching the horse. He checks his hands, cracked knuckles, a split thumb from rope burn. The skin around his fingernails is rough and torn. He rubs a little grease into it if he has any, tallow or salve, something to make the skin less likely to split. You can hear that sound, can't you? The soft rasp of palm on palm, dry skin on dry skin. In the firelight, his hands look older than he is. Then he lies down, and the ground is cold enough that it seems to rise and meet him. He can feel it through canvas, through wool, through everything. His body heat begins to push back, slowly, like a tide coming in. For a while he shivers. That is not weakness, it is biology. Tiny muscles firing to create heat. The shiver has its own rhythm. It starts in the shoulders, moves down the spine. He clenches his jaw. He forces himself to breathe slowly, because panic burns energy, and energy is warmth. Here is the dark part people do not tell you. Sometimes men did not wake up. Not because they were lazy, not because they were foolish, because cold can be patient. It can lull you. Hypothermia does not always feel like pain. Sometimes it feels like relief, a soft drifting, a desire to stop fighting, a thought that says, just rest, just close your eyes. That thought is a liar. He knows it, or he has heard it. Stories told in low voices over a chuck wagon fire. A man found in the morning with his blankets pulled neatly around him, face calm, as if he simply decided the world was too heavy. That is the kind of death that frightens me most, to be honest. Not violent, not loud, just a quiet slipping away while the stars keep shining. So he stays alert in the early part of the night. He listens to his own breathing. He tests his fingers, moving them inside the blanket. If he cannot feel them, he forces himself to sit up. Sitting up is miserable. It dumps warm air out of the bedroll and invites cold air in. But it is better than disappearing. If he is alone, he sets small rules. Wake every hour. Check the horse. Feed the fire if there is one. He does not always succeed. Exhaustion is a heavy hand on the eyelids. It pushes down. It says, "Stop." And when he does fall asleep, he falls deep. The kind of sleep that takes you like a wave takes a person who is too tired to swim. That sleep is not gentle. Dreams come with the wind. They are thin, sharp, full of sudden motion. A sound becomes a dream of hooves. A flap of canvas becomes a dream of gunfire. He wakes, heart racing, and for a moment he does not know where he is. That moment is dangerous. Confusion is another form of cold. It makes you waste time. It makes you make wrong decisions. He forces himself to name things: fire, horse, knife, sky, breath. Naming is grounding. It is what you do when the dark feels too big. The horse is not just an animal standing nearby. It is a companion and a responsibility. He can hear it breathe. Sometimes the horse will sigh, that long exhale that sounds almost human. Sometimes it will stamp a hoof. Sometimes it will whicker softly, a small noise of unease. Horses feel weather changes. A horse will lift its head when snow is coming. It will turn its body to put its hindquarters into the wind. It will search for shelter that isn't there. If the horse is tied, the rope creaks. If it is hobbled, the faint jingle of the hobbles is like tiny bells, very soft, a sound that can be comforting because it means the horse is still there. He drifts again, half asleep, half listening. And in that in-between place, I want you to notice something with me. The way cold changes time. A minute feels longer when you are waiting for warmth. A night can feel endless when you are counting your own breaths. Yet also, the mind can slide into a kind of trance because repetition is hypnotic. Wind, breath, fire. Wind, breath, fire. It becomes a lullaby made out of survival. He pulls the blanket higher. The wool scratches his chin. He turns his face slightly so he can breathe into the warm pocket near his collarbone. His mustache gathers moisture. His beard grows stiff at the edges. When he exhales, the air seems to crystallize. It is beautiful in a cruel way. The way frost feathers itself on canvas, tiny white ferns that appear where warm breath touches cold cloth. The fire dwindles. Coals become dull red, then darker, then nearly black. The light shrinks. Shadows thicken. The world becomes less visual and more tactile. The pressure of the ground, the ache in the hip, the numbness in the heel, the sting in the nose when he inhales too deeply. Somewhere out there, a coyote calls. The sound is high and wavering, like laughter from a distance. It makes the hairs on the back of the neck lift, not because a coyote is necessarily a threat, but because it reminds you that you are not alone in the dark. You are just not in charge. If he is lucky, there is a moon. Moonlight on snow can be bright enough to read by. In a way, it turns the prairie into a pale ocean. It makes every fence line a dark scribble. It makes the horse's back look like a moving shadow. If he is unlucky, there is cloud. Then the darkness is thick, pressed close. The fire becomes the only visible thing. Then the fire becomes everything. And still, he sleeps. He sleeps because he has to. Because tomorrow will come and he will need to saddle up. He will need to move cattle through drifts. He will need to break ice for water. He will need to ride out and check a fence line that has vanished under snow, looking for the one broken wire where cattle can wander off into trouble. That tomorrow is not heroic. It is just waiting. So he closes his eyes again and lets himself sink while the wind keeps talking in its low, endless voice. At some point, the body makes a demand. The bladder. It does not care about poetry. It insists. He tries to ignore it, because leaving the bedroll means surrendering the little warmth he has trapped. It means exposing skin to air that feels like a blade. It means boots again, boots that have cooled into stiff shapes. He bargains with himself in the dark. A few more minutes, then he knows the bargain will fail, and he has to move now, while he still has will. He sits up, slow and cold air pours into the bedroll like water into a bucket. He finds the boots by touch. The laces are hard. Fingers are clumsy. He manages anyway. Outside the blankets, the night is bigger. The wind touches his face, and it is startling, like being slapped awake. He walks a few paces from camp, careful, listening. The ground crunches under his boots. In the dark, his own breath is loud. He returns quickly, and when he slides back into the bedroll, he can feel the heat he left behind. Thinner now, but still there, like a candle that did not fully go out. That is the rhythm. Need, movement, cold, return. He learns, in winter, that dryness is a rumor. Even on a clear night, even when the sky is sharp with stars and the air feels clean enough to cut, moisture still finds him. It sneaks out of his own lungs. It rises as warmth, meets cold canvas, and turns into something you can touch. A thin film, a skin of water. Then, if the temperature drops another few degrees, it becomes frost, a delicate crust that looks almost pretty when firelight hits it, like sugar dusted on cloth. But pretty is not the same as kind. Inside a tent, you can hear it forming, not loudly, just a faint, brittle whisper, as if the canvas itself is exhaling. By morning, the inside roof is lined with tiny ice crystals. When someone shifts, when a gust shakes the guy ropes, those crystals let go and drift down. Silent snow, falling inside the only shelter you have. You wake with it, on your face, on your eyelashes, in the fold near your neck where you tried to keep warmth. It melts, slowly, from your own heat, and turns your wool damp in one more spot. This is how winter wears a person down, not with one dramatic storm every night, with small, repetitive thefts. He lies there and feels the dampness. And for a moment, if he is honest, there is a flash of anger, a hot thought, useless but human. Why should breathing make things worse? Why should the simple act of being alive add water to the very blankets that are supposed to keep him warm? Then the thought fades, because anger is expensive. It costs energy, and energy is heat, so he adapts. He learns to sleep with his head slightly away from the highest point of the tent, because that is where condensation gathers most. He learns which patch of canvas leaks first when wet snow piles on top. He learns not to press his hand against the wall, because the second you touch it from inside, the moisture on the outside begins to seep, and then it drips, slow and patient, right onto the place you were hoping to keep dry. He learns to keep a small gap at the edge of his bedroll near his mouth, not enough to invite a gale, just enough to let his breath escape instead of soaking the wool. You know that feeling? When you pull a blanket over your face and it feels warm at first, and then, after a while, the fabric grows cold and damp and you regret it? He knows it too, so he makes a little breathing tunnel, a tiny compromise with the night. If there are other men in the tent, dampness becomes communal. 4 bodies in a 7x7 space is not cozy. It is just crowded. Elbows touch. Boots bump. Someone's knee is always in your ribs. The smells blend. Damp wool. Smoke. Leather. Unwashed skin. Coffee grounds caught in a beard. It is not pleasant. And still, there is comfort in it. Not comfort like softness, but comfort like proof. Proof that you are not the only one lying here fighting the same cold. And in a way, that shared closeness is part of the frontier's strange mercy. It gives you witnesses. If you get too cold, someone might hear your breathing change. Someone might notice you are shivering too hard. Someone might mutter your name and tell you to sit up, to move, to drink something hot. Men did not talk about fear, not directly. They talked around it. They complained about boots. They argued about where the wind would shift. They joked about buffalo chips like it was a fine cuisine. But the fear lived in the spaces between words, because winter also meant watch. On a trail drive, the herd is a sleeping mass of muscle and horn. and it can explode into motion with almost no warning. A sudden noise, a predator slipping too close, a gust that flaps canvas like gunfire. Sometimes, a single nervous steer jolts awake and bolts, and panic spreads like a spark through dry grass. A stampede at night is not like anything else. It is the earth turning into thunder. So someone stays awake 2 hours, 3. The rotation depends on how many men, how tired they are, how bad the weather feels. The watchman is roused by a low voice, close to his ear. Your turn. No ceremony, no gentle wake-up, just a name and a responsibility. He emerges from the warm pocket he has built, and the cold hits like a slap, familiar and still awful. He pulls on his coat. If it was off, he finds his hat. Hats stay on. Always. He tightens the bandana at his neck. He checks his boots. If he slept with them in the bedroll, they are at least not frozen solid. Then he steps out into the night. The first breath outside hurts. It stings the inside of his nose, makes his eyes water. He blinks and tears freeze at the corners. He stands for a moment, forcing his mind fully awake, because the dark will take any half-asleep man and make him careless. If the herd is close, he saddles a night horse, one kept ready for this purpose. The leather creaks when he swings the saddle up. The horse shifts, blows warm breath into the cold, and that breath looks like smoke. The cinch strap is stiff. His fingers fumble. He swears under his breath, not loud, just a small hiss of frustration. Then he mounts, and the world becomes movement again, a slow circle. The watchman's ride is not a chase, it is presence. He moves along the edge of the herd, steady, predictable, so the cattle sense him and settle. Sometimes he hums, sometimes he sings, not a song for performance, a song for rhythm, a simple line repeated, soft and low, a thread of sound to stitch the darkness together. It always strikes me as one of the strangest lullabies, a tired man singing to keep 1,000 animals calm, while he himself tries not to fall asleep on horseback, because that temptation is real. The middle hour of watch can feel almost peaceful. The horse's gait is steady. The herd breathes in a massive, slow way, like one creature. The stars wheel overhead, indifferent but beautiful. The cold is constant, and when something is constant long enough, it becomes background. Your body stops flinching at every gust. Your mind begins to drift. That is when danger creeps in. Not always in the form of wolves or rustlers. Sometimes danger is just your own eyelids. He fights it with small tactics. He shifts in the saddle. He stands in the stirrups for a few seconds, letting blood move. He bites the inside of his cheek, just enough to feel pain. He talks to the horse, low and nonsense, because sound keeps the mind anchored. Easy, boy. Easy now. Good. If the watch is quiet, it can almost feel like meditation. Then a sound changes, and the whole body tightens. A sudden clatter, a snort that is too sharp, a ripple through the herd, a shifting of hooves. The watchman's horse lifts its head, ears forward. A question in the animal's posture. He stops singing. He listens. Sometimes it is nothing. A coyote passing, a calf nudging its mother, a branch breaking in cold. But you cannot assume nothing. You cannot afford to. He rides closer, slowly, because speed can startle. He speaks again, soft, the same tone you might use to calm a child from a nightmare. Easy. It's nothing. And the herd, sensing that calm, settles. The ripple dies. That is the best kind of watch. The kind where nothing happens. And nothing happens because you were there, present, steady, still. The cost is paid. When his watch ends, he returns to camp, and the warmth he built earlier is gone. Someone else has been in his spot, or the bedroll cooled, or dampness crept deeper. He slides inside and the wool feels cold again, as if it has forgotten him. He curls tight. He tries to fall asleep fast. Experienced men can. They learn how to drop into sleep, like falling through a trapdoor. Younger men lie awake, their minds still riding circles, still listening for hoofbeats, still humming the song in their skull. A stampede begins with a sound like a single breath being sucked in. Then the ground shakes. Hooves strike frozen soil, and the noise multiplies, becomes a rolling roar. The watchman shouts. The camp erupts. Men fling themselves out of bedrolls, half-dressed because they never fully undressed, boots shoved on, hats grabbed, hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. In those moments, the dark is not soothing. It is predatory. It hides holes, hides wire, hides whatever might break a horse's leg. But even then, the work is not cinematic. It is frantic, yes, but also methodical. In its own harsh way, riders fan out. They try to swing wide, to circle the moving mass, to turn the cattle into a curve instead of a straight line. A straight line stampede runs until something stops it. A canyon, a river, a fence, a town. A curve can slow. A curve can fold back on itself. A curve can become a circle, and a circle can become stillness. Sometimes it works. Sometimes men get hurt. Sometimes a horse goes down. Sometimes the sound of a man yelling is cut short in a way you never forget. He has heard those stories. Maybe he has seen it. Maybe that is why his singing is so steady. Maybe that is why he watches the herd like a priest watches a congregation. Because one wrong movement can become a tragedy. When morning comes after a night like that, the men look older. Their faces are pale in the first light. Coffee is swallowed, not savored. No one jokes. The humor returns later, because humor is also a survival tool. But in that first hour, everyone is quiet, and then the routine begins again. Because winter does not pause for your fear. It does not care if your hands are bruised from rope work. It does not care if your eyes burn from sleeplessness. It does not care if your wool is damp and heavy and smells like smoke and horse. The day asks what it always asks. Saddle up, ride out, move what must be moved, fix what is broken, find what is lost. And in the evening, when the light fades again, he will build another small fire. He will boil another pot of coffee. He will lay down on another patch of frozen earth. He will listen to wind and breathing and the soft crackle of canvas in the cold. He will do it again, because that is what the work is. Before sleep, there is always that small, stubborn effort to bargain with dampness. He spreads one blanket near the fire, not close enough to scorch, not far enough to be pointless. He kneels and holds his hands over it, palms down, feeling the faint heat rising through wool, feeling the way the fibers release a smell when warmed. Lanolin, smoke, a sour note of old sweat that is dried and been re-wetted and dried again. It is the smell of surviving, and it can be oddly comforting because it is familiar. He turns the blanket once, then again. The side facing the fire feels almost dry, but when he presses his knuckles into the thickness, he knows the damp is still inside, tucked deep where heat does not reach quickly. Wool is honest that way. It does not pretend to be dry when it is not. It just warms on the surface and keeps its wet secret. Sometimes, if there is time, he shakes the blankets hard. The motion sends tiny grains of frost and dust into the air. They glitter in firelight for a second, and then vanish. The blankets snap like flags. His shoulders ache from the movement. Then he lowers himself to the ground. The ground has a way of announcing itself. A hard, decisive cold against the hip as he sits. A pressure that does not give. If there is a small stone he missed, it introduces itself sharply, like a finger poking up from beneath the earth. He shifts, scraping canvas over frozen soil, listening for that crisp crackle stiff canvas makes when it flexes. When he finally lies flat, He feels the night from two directions at once. Cold from above, in the air. Cold from below, in the earth. The wool beneath him compresses and becomes thin, and he can almost sense his heat being pulled downward, the planet itself drinking it patiently. That is when he does the small, careful work of sealing himself in. He tucks an edge of blanket under his shoulder. He pulls canvas up and around, creating an envelope. He checks his feet, because feet are the first to complain. If his boots are off, he slides them near his calves inside the bedroll, letting his body keep the leather from freezing. If his boots are on, he loosens them a notch, just enough to let blood flow without losing readiness. He draws his hat down a little, brim shading his eyes even though there is almost nothing to see. And then he listens. He lets the sounds line up in his mind, the small pops of the coals, the patient chewing of horses, the far hush of wind, until they blur into one steady, low tide. And in that blur, the night becomes a little less sharp. The fear becomes a little less loud. The cold stays, but it stops arguing. It simply is. There is a line, quiet, almost invisible, between endurance and erasure. He walks it every night and keeps walking, one slow breath at a time. In some winters, the worst thing is not the wind. It is the quiet. A line camp sits alone on a stretch of range that feels too wide for one man to own with his eyes. Sometimes it is a cabin, a small square of boards set into the land like a stubborn thought. Sometimes it is a dugout, half buried, the earth itself used as a wall against the weather. Sometimes it is nothing but canvas again, a tent pitched where a creek bends, because that is where water is, and water is life, even when it tries to freeze. Tonight, it is a cabin. The door opens with a slow groan, wood protesting in the cold. He steps inside, and the air is still, so still it feels heavier than outside. The cabin smells of old smoke and mouse droppings and pine resin that has seeped from cutboards. There is a stove in the corner, iron blackened by use, and beside it, a stack of split wood that looks too small for the length of the night. He sets his saddle down carefully. Leather thumps against a plank floor. The sound echoes. That echo is what he notices first. Out on the open prairie, sound gets swallowed. Here, inside four walls, it comes back to him, as if the cabin is listening. He lights a match. The match head flares, bright and sudden, and for a second, the cabin is a tiny stage of orange light. His fingers cup the flame. He watches the fire catch in the stove, thin at first, then stronger, licking dry kindling. The stove begins to tick as metal warms, a small, sharp sound like a clock trying to remember time. He hangs his coat near the stove, not too close. Everything near a stove is a calculation. Too close and a sleeve can smolder. Too far and it never dries. He feels the damp in the wool with his fingertips, that familiar chill, and he wonders, briefly, how a man can be surrounded by cold and still carry water inside his clothing. He makes coffee, because coffee is a ritual that tells the body it is safe to keep going. The pot is dented. The cup is tin. The water takes a long time to boil. He sits on an upturned crate and listens to the slow, patient hiss of the stove. Wind taps at the cabin walls, a soft thudding as if someone is brushing their knuckles against the boards. And then, nothing. No other voices, no snoring, no low jokes, no boots scraping outside a tent. Just him, just the stove and the wind. That long manoi, that kind of quiet, can feel like a weight. You know the feeling when a room is too silent and your own breathing sounds loud enough to embarrass you? Out here, that embarrassment turns into something else. A reminder. If you cough, there is no one to hear it except the walls. If you choke, there is no one to slap your back. If you get sick, there is no one to notice your eyes are dull. He drinks coffee and feels it warm. His mouth, his throat, his stomach. For a moment, the warmth is almost luxurious. Then it fades, leaving only the memory. He eats simply, beans if he has them, a strip of bacon if he can spare it, bread that is more hard than soft. Food tastes different when you eat alone. There is no conversation to spread time out. Each bite is its own small sound. Chew, swallow, the tick of the stove. Chew. He checks his horse before he does anything else. Outside, the night is so clear, the stars look close enough to snag on a branch. The cold hits him like a door opening into ice. His horse stands near the cabin, hobbled, head down. Steam comes from its nostrils, thick in the moonlight. He rubs the animal's neck, feeling the heat under hair, the solid life of muscle. The horse turns its head slightly, breath washing warm over his glove. Good, he murmurs, and it is not a command, it is companionship. He checks the hobbles, he checks the ground, because a horse can stumble, can tangle, can break a leg in darkness. He looks for cougar tracks, wolf sign, anything that suggests the night is hungrier than usual. Then he returns inside and closes the door, and the cabin sighs, as if relieved. Sleep in a cabin is not like sleep in a bed. There is a platform against the wall, rough boards that serve as a bunk. He unrolls his bedroll on top of it anyway, because the bedroll is his real bed, his portable, private world. Canvas first, then wool. He lays it out with the same motions he uses outside, because routine is a kind of anchor, and anchors matter when you are alone. The stove warms the cabin, but unevenly. Near the iron, there is a pocket of comfort. 2 steps away, the air is cold again. Heat rises, so his feet are colder than his face. He sits on the bunk and pulls off his boots, flexing his toes, letting blood return with a dull ache. He sets the boots inside the bedroll near his calves. If he leaves them on the floor, they might freeze. If he leaves them too close to the stove, the leather might crack from sudden heat. Everything is compromise. He stares at the stove for a long time. Fire behind iron has a different voice than fire in open air. It is muffled, contained. You do not hear the crackle clearly. You hear a steady, low roar, like distant water. The iron expands and contracts, ticking and pinging as if the stove is speaking in a language of metal. And when he finally lies down, the loneliness shows itself. Not as sadness, exactly, more like an absence of edges. In a shared camp, the other men create boundaries. Their bodies, their sounds, their presence gives the night a shape. Here, the night is shapeless. The walls are close, yes, but the world outside them is enormous, and he can feel it pressing in through every seam. He pulls the blanket up to his chin and listens. A mouse scrapes in the wall. A tiny sound. It makes him smile, faintly, because even that is company. Then the mouse stops, and the silence returns. His mind starts to do what minds do in silence. It fills the space. He thinks of the herd out there somewhere, scattered across winter pasture. He thinks of fences half buried in snow, of posts leaning, of wire that sings in wind. He thinks of a calf that might be stuck in a drift, a small, dark mound of life, waiting for morning, or not waiting at all. He thinks of men in town, in saloons, with lamps and laughter and beds that do not freeze. Then he thinks of the things nobody says out loud. A rider who went missing last winter, a body found weeks later in a shallow draw, half covered by snow, hat still on. A man who had tried to make it back to camp in a whiteout and walked in a circle until cold took him gently, like a hand closing over a candle flame. The story is told quietly, not to scare, but to instruct. Do not leave the light. Do not wander too far. Do not trust your sense of direction in storm. He lies there and remembers it, and the memory is not sharp fear. It is soft caution, like a blanket folded over a knife, to keep his mind from running too far. He writes. He keeps a small notebook, paper wrapped in oilcloth. The pencil is worn short. He lights a candle, one stub, saved for nights like this, and the flame trembles in the draught, casting long shadows that stretch and shrink with every breath of wind. He writes about the weather, about the sky, about how the stove draws the moisture from his coat, but leaves his blankets damp. He writes the number of miles he rode, the condition of the fences, the tracks he saw near the creek, and sometimes he writes things that are not facts. He writes, "I miss voices." He writes, "The quiet makes my thoughts loud." He writes, "The horse is the only warm thing that answers me." Then he closes the book, because even honesty has a limit, and he does not want to stare too long into his own chest. The candle is blown out. Darkness returns, but it is not complete, because the stove still glows faintly, a red eye behind iron. He drifts toward sleep, and sleep, when it comes, is not pure. It is threaded with listening, because line camp nights have their own dangers. On the third night of his rotation, wind rises hard after midnight. The cabin creaks, the boards talk. A gust hits the door and the latch rattles, a quick metallic chatter that snaps him awake. He lies still, heart beating slow but firm, and listens. Outside, something moves. A hoof on frozen ground makes a sound, like a stone tapped against glass. Then another, then a pause. His horse. He sits up. Cold air slides across his face. He pulls on his coat, fumbling with sleeves in darkness. His fingers find the doorknob, cold enough to bite through glove leather. He opens the door. Wind pours in, sharp and loud, carrying snow like grit. His eyes water instantly. In the starlight he sees the horse, head high, body angled as if it wants to flee. The picket rope is pulled tight. Something is out there, not visible, just a presence that makes the horse stiff, ears forward, nostrils flaring. That old primal awareness animals have, the kind humans envy. He speaks to the horse, low and steady. Easy, easy. The horse does not settle. A sound comes from the darkness beyond the horse. Not a growl, not a bark, a soft crunch, like a boot stepping on frozen grass. His hand goes to his rifle, leaning by the door. He does not lift it yet. He just touches it, feeling the familiar wood, the cold metal. It steadies him. Then he sees it. A shadow, low to the ground, moving, with a cautious grace. A wolf, maybe, or a coyote close enough to seem larger than it is, or simply a stray dog from some distant homestead, hungry and brave. It pauses when he steps out. Its eyes catch starlight for an instant. 2 faint points. It does not lunge. It measures him. He measures it. In that moment, the frontier feels very old. Older than fences. Older than ranches. A place where men are only one kind of animal among many. He lifts his voice, not shouting, but firm. "Get." The shadow retreats, quietly, like a thought dissolving. The horse trembles, then exhales, a long, warm breath that looks like smoke. He rubs the horse's neck until the muscles loosen. He checks the rope again. He stands there in the wind for a full minute, letting his eyes scan the dark, listening for any second movement. Nothing. He goes back inside. He closes the door. The cabin's warmth feels fragile now, like a bubble that could pop with one more gust. He lies down again and waits for sleep to return. And this is the cruel part. After the danger passes, the mind keeps searching for it. It replays the sound, the crunch, the eyes, the shape in darkness. It imagines what could have happened, and imagination is colder than reality. So he does what he can. He breathes slowly. He listens to the stove. He lets the ticking metal become a metronome. He lets the wind become a steady noise instead of a warning. Gradually, the body remembers how to soften. His hands unclench. His jaw relaxes. His shoulders sink into wool. The thought of the shadow fades into the same dark it came from. By morning, there is no sign of it. Only his own footprints in the snow outside the door, and the horses, and the endless plain. That is how line camp nights pass. Not with constant terror, with brief spikes of alertness inside, long stretches of quiet. One day follows another. One night follows another. He rides out in gray light, checks fences, searches for cattle in trouble, returns by late afternoon with his eyelashes rimed with frost and his coat stiff with cold. He makes coffee. He feeds the stove. He writes a few lines. He listens. And slowly, he learns that solitude has two faces. One face is peace, the kind that comes when you accept the quiet, when your mind stops fighting it, when you can hear your own breath and not be afraid of it. The other face is erosion, the slow wearing away of your sense of being witnessed. He tries to keep the first face and not let the second take him. He talks to his horse every day. He says good morning. He says good boy. He says, we'll make it through. He says it even when he does not fully believe it, because saying it shapes belief. He counts small things, matches, coffee grounds, days until relief comes. He marks them in his notebook like notches on a stick, and when sleep finally comes, deep and heavy for an hour or two, it is a gift, a small mercy, because winter will keep taking small things, dryness, warmth, rest. All he has to do is keep giving, a little at a time, without giving everything. On the coldest mornings, he wakes before dawn not because he wants to, but because his body has decided sleep is no longer worth the heat it costs. He lies still for a moment, listening to the stove's last faint sigh, feeling the cabin's air settle into a deeper chill. Then he sits up, and the blanket's warmth leaks away in seconds, like water poured onto sand. He blows into his hands. The breath is warm, then instantly cold. He swings his legs over the edge of the bunk, and his bare feet touch the floorboards, and the boards feel like river stones in winter. He winces, quietly, and pulls his boots close. Morning in a line camp does not arrive like a friendly visitor. It arrives like a slow change in the color of suffering. The first hint is not light, it is sound. A shift in the horse outside, a deeper exhale, a hoof scraping at frozen earth. The stove, if it has been fed carefully through the night, has a thin red heart left inside it, and that heart makes a faint, steady breathing noise, a low whisper of heat that never quite becomes warmth. He lies still and listens. Thut long manoi. This is the moment that always feels like a question. Do I stay inside the bedroll for 5 more minutes, stealing a little extra comfort? Or do I get up now, while my muscles are still stiff, while the cabin is still darker than it will be, while the cold is at its sharpest? He knows the answer, of course. The day will not wait. The calves will not wait. The fence wire will not untangle itself. The water trough will not unfreeze by kindness. So he moves. The first movement is small. A flex of toes inside wool socks that are never truly dry. A slow roll of shoulders that creak like saddle leather. He sits up, and the blanket's trapped heat slips out around his waist, quick as breath. Cold slides in to replace it, and it feels personal, even though it isn't. He reaches for his boots. They are not frozen solid, because he tucked them into the bedroll near his calves, but they are still stubborn, leather stiffened by the night's cold. He pushes his foot in, and the boot resists. Not because the boot hates him, but because everything in winter becomes less willing to bend. He laces them with fingers that do not want to cooperate. The knots feel clumsy. A man can be skilled with a rope and still fumble with a bootlace at dawn. It always humbles him. He stands, slowly, and his knees protest. Not loudly, just a dull ache that reminds him he slept on a hard surface, even in this cabin, and the body keeps receipts. His back straightens. His breath becomes visible in the air inside the cabin, and that tells him the stove has cooled too far. He feeds it. One split stick, then another. A handful of chips if he brought any in. Dry dung from the prairie. Hard as stone. Light in weight. rich in necessity. He has used them before when wood was scarce. They burn with a low, patient heat, not dramatic flame, more like a slow ember that refuses to die. He strikes a match. The flare of sulfur is bright, and for a second the cabin's shadows jump. Then the flame settles into kindling, and the stove begins to tick again. Iron waking up, metal stretching, and remembering its purpose. While the fire takes hold, he does the other small tasks that make survival feel like routine instead of panic. He rolls his blanket edge back and checks it for damp spots. There are always damp spots. His breath did its work. Condensation did its work. The wool is heavier than it should be, and he can feel the extra water like a secret weight, hidden in fibers. He lifts the blanket, and the smell rises. Old smoke, lanolin, a sour note that isn't filth exactly, more like time, the scent of nights that have been endured. He shakes the blanket once. A thin dust of frost drifts off and sparkles in the stove's weak glow. It is almost beautiful, and that is the strange cruelty of winter, how it decorates hardship. He makes coffee, not because it tastes good, though sometimes it does, in a sharp, bitter way. He makes it because hot liquid is warmth that cannot be stolen by wind. He pours water into the pot, sets it near the stove, listens for the first small signs of heat, the tiny clicks and murmurs as water changes its mind from stillness to motion. As it warms, he goes outside. The door opens, and cold pours in like a living thing. He steps into it anyway, the way you step into a cold river when there is no bridge. The sky is pale in the east, not bright, just less dark. Stars still hang overhead, but they look weaker now, as if dawn has begun to erase them one by one. The snow, if there is snow, reflects that pale light and makes the world feel open and empty. If there is no snow, the prairie is a black sea of grass, stubble, and frost, every blade stiff, every patch of ground hard. His horse turns its head toward him. Steam blooms from its nostrils. He rests his forehead against the horse's neck for a moment. You know that feeling, when you press your face to something warm and living and your body relaxes without asking permission? It is like that. A small, quiet mercy. He checks the hobbles. He checks the picket rope. He runs his hand down the horse's leg, feeling for heat, for swelling, for any sign that the animal stood wrong in the night. He picks the hooves clean with a tool he keeps in his pocket, scraping ice and packed dirt away until the hoof is honest again. Then he looks across the range. This is the part that always makes him feel small. A man can ride all day and still not touch the edges of this land. In the dim pre-dawn, the horizon is only a line where darkness meets darkness, and the wind has a voice that sounds like it has been speaking for 1,000 years. He listens for cattle. Sometimes he hears them, a low moan, a soft shuffle. Sometimes he hears nothing, and that silence is not comforting. It is simply information he cannot read yet. He goes back inside. The coffee is close now. He can smell it, even before it boils, the faint, earthy bitterness rising from the pot. He drops grounds in, watches them darken, watches them swirl. The water begins to tremble. Then it boils, not a violent boil, but a steady rolling that feels like a promise. He pours coffee into a tin cup. The metal burns his fingers through the glove. He welcomes the pain because it means he can still feel. He drinks. The first sip is too hot. It stings his tongue. He waits a second, then sips again. Warmth slides down his throat and spreads in his chest like a small lantern being lit inside him. Breakfast is quick. Whatever is left. Beans warmed in the same pot. A strip of bacon if he has. Hard bread softened by coffee, if he must. He eats, standing, because sitting invites lingering, and lingering invites cold. Then he packs. Packing a bedroll is not a casual act. It is a ritual that decides how heavy your horse will carry your life. Canvas laid flat, wool stacked in layers. The order matters. He wants the inner blanket closest to his skin at night, to be the least damp, the one that feels least cold at first touch. But that is a dream more than a plan. Still, he adjusts. He folds the corners. He presses air out. He rolls tight, tight, as if squeezing the night itself into a smaller shape. His hands work, even when his mind drifts. He thinks of spring, not in a hopeful way, more in a distant way, like thinking of a town you might never reach. He thinks of the smell of wet earth when it thaws. He thinks of sleeping without hearing wind scrape at walls. Then he stops thinking, because thinking too far ahead makes the present feel heavier. He straps the roll. The rope bites into canvas. The knots are simple, quick to untie with cold fingers. Complex knots are for warm hands and daylight. He shoulders the bedroll and carries it outside. It is heavier than yesterday, because dampness adds weight day by day, and he can feel it in his spine, a slow accumulation. He sets it behind the saddle and ties it down, balancing it so it will not sag and pull against the saddle strings. He saddles the horse. The saddle itself is cold, leather, stiff, the metal of the stirrups biting like ice. He lifts it up, and the weight is familiar, a steady burden. He sets it on the horse's back, and the horse shifts, adjusting. He tightens the cinch. The horse flinches slightly, then settles. He checks his gear, rope coiled, knife in pocket, matches wrapped in oilcloth, a small piece of tinder saved for emergencies, a letter, maybe, folded and softened from being touched too many times. Then he mounts. The moment he swings into the saddle, his body remembers what it is to be useful. Motion returns. Blood moves. The cold is still there, but it no longer pins him down. He rides out into the pale morning, and the cabin behind him becomes a dark square against the vastness, already beginning to feel unreal. He follows fence lines. He watches wire, for sag, for breaks, for places where snow drifted and bent it down. He looks for tracks, cattle tracks, wolf tracks, the delicate, almost polite prints of a fox. A cougar's pad marks, wide and quiet, telling him the night had teeth even when he could not see them. Sometimes he finds a calf, a small, trembling shape near a drift, eyes wide, breath puffing fast. He dismounts slowly, because sudden movement can startle an animal into wasting energy. He speaks low. He gathers the calf with arms that feel clumsy in layers of clothing. The calf's body is warm and shaking. He feels its heartbeat against his forearm. Too fast, too fragile. He carries it to its mother if he can find her. He watches for the cow's eyes, the way a mother cow looks at you with suspicion and need at the same time. He sets the calf down. The cow sniffs it, licks it, and for a second the scene feels tender in a world that rarely is. Then he rides on. By afternoon, the sun has moved across the sky, and even if it provides little warmth, it provides color. The prairie turns from black to brown to pale gold where frost catches light. Shadows stretch thin and long. The wind shifts, never stopping, only changing direction like a restless mind. He returns to the cabin when the light begins to fade again, not because he wants to, but because night is coming, and night will ask the same price it asked yesterday. He ties the horse. He feeds it what he can. He checks its back for rub marks from the saddle. He rubs the animal's neck again, because touch is reassurance, and reassurance matters even to a horse. Then he goes inside, and the cycle begins again. Fire, coffee, blankets, silence. He learns, slowly, that winter is not a single hardship. It is 1,000 small ones, repeated until they feel like the shape of life. And when he finally lies down, he lets the stove's ticking become a lullaby, and he breathes slow, and he tells himself, quietly, that he will do it again tomorrow, because tomorrow will come, whether he is ready or not. That night, the wind arrives earlier. It presses at the door with steady patience, and the cabin answers with creaks, roof beams, shifting like tired shoulders. The stove answers too. Tick, tick, tick. tick, iron cooling, iron remembering. He sits close to the small flame of a candle and watches it lean, then straighten again. I always find it strange how a candle can look brave without meaning to. A thin tongue of light, surrounded by cold, still insisting on its own shape. To keep his mind from growing too loud, he gives himself little chores. Not heroic chores, simple ones. He sharpens his knife with slow strokes until the edge feels honest again. He stitches a small tear in canvas, thread biting into stiff cloth, hands working by habit more than comfort. He checks his matches, still wrapped in oilcloth, still dry, then puts them away like a secret he cannot afford to lose. Outside, a single howl carries across the frozen air. Not close, not far enough to ignore. Another voice answers, higher, thinner. Coyote, maybe. Wolf, maybe. At this distance, it is just hunger speaking softly. He doesn't rush. He only listens. He checks his rope. He checks the latch. He checks the horse again, palm on warm neck, feeling the animal's breath rise in gentle steam. Then he lies down. The blankets are damp, always. He tucks canvas under his hip, seals the edge, makes the small pocket of warmth as tight as he can. He breathes slow, and the stove's ticking becomes a kind of lullaby. Sleep comes in pieces, a short drift, a brief waking when the horse shifts and leather creaks, a longer drift when the wind settles into a steady rush outside, like distant water. In one quiet moment, ember glow, barely lighting the room. He notices the space between breaths, that tiny pause where nothing happens. He rests there, just for a heartbeat, then lets the darkness take him again. Toward the coldest hour, he wakes with the familiar ache in one shoulder. He turns carefully, not wanting to tear open all the trapped heat at once. Canvas crackles like dry leaves. Wool shifts, heavy with its quiet moisture. For a moment the cold reaches in, finds the small warm pocket, tries to flatten it. He pulls the blanket edge tighter. He exhales into the dark, letting the breath warm the air beneath the wool. He thinks of nothing in particular, just the sound of wind, the patient weight of night. And slowly, without any dramatic change, the body stops fighting. The muscles loosen. The mind drifts. The last thing he hears is the stove's soft ticking, like a slow count that never needs to reach an ending. After enough nights like that, winter stops feeling like weather. It starts feeling like a place. Not a place you travel to with a map. A place you wake up inside and go to sleep inside and carry with you even when you ride miles. Cold in your sleeves, cold in the leather of your reins, cold in the way your thoughts move a little slower, as if the mind itself has to conserve heat. When the work shifts from line camp to a moving outfit, the rhythm changes. Less solitude, more bodies, more noise, and yet the same thin wall between you and the night. They camp where the work ends, not where comfort lives. A shallow draw, if they can find one. The lee side of a ridge, a patch of ground that looks flat enough in the last light to trust. Sometimes they settle too close to water and regret it before. Midnight, because cold air pools in low places the way sorrow pools in a quiet mind. He rides in with the others, and the first thing that happens is always the same. Horses first. Saddles come off with a grunt. Leather, stiff, heavy with sweat that will turn cold as soon as it stops moving. They lay saddles on rocks or logs so the underside won't soak in damp ground. They check legs, hooves, cinches, the small details that keep a horse from becoming a problem tomorrow. I've always found it oddly tender, the way men who say very little can still be gentle with their animals. No speeches, no soft music. Just a hand sliding down a warm neck, a quiet murmur, a moment of shared breath in freezing air. Then the search for fuel begins. Wood is a rumor out on the open prairie. A few crooked branches along a creek, a dead stick caught in grass. In some places, nothing at all. So they stoop and gather what the land offers. Buffalo chips, dry, flattened, sun-baked dung, light in the hand, brittle, and strangely precious. They pile it near a shallow pit scraped into the earth, or ring a space with rocks when the ground is too hard to dig. A fire built from chips is not pretty. It does not leap. It smolders. It glows. It gives a steady heat that feels more like permission than comfort. Cookpot goes on. Water trembles. Coffee begins its slow ascent from necessity into ritual. And while the fire finds its shape, the canvas comes out. A tent, if they have one, is raised like a small, stubborn thought against the sky. Center pole set, guy ropes stretched, stakes driven, or rocks piled when stakes won't bite frozen soil. Hands work quickly because fingers go numb fast, and light drains away faster than you expect. Canvas stiffens in the cold. It makes a sound when it folds, a crackle like thin ice. The men know not to brush the inside wall once the outside is wet. They know where the seams leak. They know which patch will drip if the wind shifts and drives sleet sideways. They don't talk much about any of it. They just do it. Bedrolls are unlashed from saddles, ropes loosened with the blunt impatience of cold hands, canvas unwrapped, wool shaken out. The wool has a smell. You don't notice it at first. Not really. Then, you live with it, and it becomes part of your definition of night. Lanolin and smoke, sweat that never quite dries, a sourness that isn't exactly dirty, just lived in. They spread bedrolls around the tent's edge, feet toward the center. If no tent, they lay them in a rough cluster near the fire, not too close, because sparks are small and careless, and canvas is not forgiving. They clear rocks where they can. They kick aside sticks. They smooth the ground with a boot. And still, there is always some hidden pressure point waiting to announce itself at 2 a.m. One man keeps his boots on. Another tucks them into the bedroll near his calves. Someone mutters a joke about a frozen boot being a punishment designed by God. A few quiet laughs. Then silence again. Darkness arrives. Not all at once. First, the world loses detail. Then it loses color. Then it loses edges. And finally, it becomes a blackness that feels thick, as if you could reach out and touch it. The fire becomes the only bright thing. A small circle of light. Everything outside it turns into suggestion. Wind finds the tent and makes it breathe. The canvas pulses. Guy. Ropes hum. A low note that changes with each gust. Sometimes a flap slaps, and the sound makes you flinch, even when you know it's only cloth. Inside, breath becomes moisture. Warm air rises, touches cold canvas, turns to droplets, turns to frost. By morning, the tent will be lined with tiny ice crystals, and when someone bumps the wall, that frost will fall like silent snow onto bedrolls. They lie down anyway. He pulls his blanket edge tight around his shoulder. He tucks his hands under his armpits for a while, warming fingers that ache with cold. He tries to relax his jaw. He listens. The soundscape of a winter camp is its own world. Fire crackle, the soft grind of horses chewing. An occasional snort, sharp enough to wake you. Canvas flutter, breathing, a cough that echoes too loudly in a small tent. If there is a herd nearby, the night has another layer. Cattle shifting, a low, uneasy moan. The soft, endless movement of hundreds of bodies settling, then unsettling, then settling again, and then the watch begins. Someone is always awake, not because they want to be, because cattle can stampede on a dream, because a loose horse can become a death sentence, because the night has too many mouths, even if most of them stay closed. The man on watch pulls himself out of warmth with visible reluctance. He stands, boots crunching on frost, breath white. He checks the herd's edge, walking slow or riding a night horse in a wide circle. Sometimes he hums, not to entertain himself, to tell the cattle where he is, to keep them from startling when a shadow moves. It is a strange kind of lullaby, a low tune carried into darkness, meant for animals, meant for survival. And if you are half asleep in your bedroll, hearing it drift past, it can feel oddly comforting, like proof that someone else is awake in the same cold you are trying to sleep through. He is woken for his own watch, with a hand on his shoulder and a quiet name spoken close to his ear. No ceremony, just your turn. The worst part is the first 10 seconds, leaving the small warm pocket, feeling the cold swallow you whole. The body wants to curl back down immediately, to pretend it did not hear the call. He forces himself up. Outside, the stars are hard and bright. Cold air makes them look sharper. The grass under his boots is stiff with frost. Each step makes a small crunch that feels too loud. He moves around the herd's edge. He listens for the sound that doesn't belong. A sudden rush, a ripple of hooves, a cough from an animal too deep, too wet, anything that hints at trouble. Most of the time, nothing happens. That is the truth. The watch is long because the danger is rare, but when it comes fast. So he stays awake. He counts stars. He counts circles. He counts breaths. You know that half-dream state, when you are awake but your mind keeps sliding towards sleep, like a horse pulling against a rope? That is watch. A constant, quiet fight. When his time ends, he wakes the next man. He returns to his bedroll and crawls back into the damp wool like a weary animal returning to its den. Sleep returns, but not deeply. It comes in thin layers. Midnight passes. The fire dwindles to a dull red glow. The cold from the ground presses upward, relentless. Wool beneath him is crushed flat. Canvas blocks dirt, blocks snow, but not the physics of heat. The earth takes what it wants. He shifts his hips. A rock announces itself under his shoulder. He rolls to the other side. Canvas crackles. Cold slips in. He waits for warmth to rebuild. This is what the night becomes. A long negotiation. Seal the gap. Hold the heat. Release the ache. Seal the gap again. Toward the coldest hour before dawn, the camp reaches its deepest silence. Even wind sometimes pauses, as if listening. And in that pause, you can hear the smallest things. A saddle buckle ticking as metal contracts. A horse's teeth grinding grass. The faintest hiss of embers dying. It is eerie, yes, but it is also calm, in a way. A calm made from resignation. A calm that says, the night is doing what the night does, and we are still here. By the time the first gray enters the eastern sky, he has slept and woken and slept again. He has not rested, not truly. He has only endured. And that endurance becomes familiar. The first winter night is a shock. The 10th is a lesson. The 50th is routine. The body learns what it can ignore. The mind learns how to go blank on purpose. And in that blankness, in that slow breathing, there is something almost peaceful. Not because the night is kind, because the mind has found a way to float above it, just enough. When dawn finally arrives, it arrives softly. Dark becomes charcoal. Charcoal becomes gray. Gray becomes a world with edges again. Men stir. Canvas rustles. Someone coughs. Someone curses quietly as he pulls on a boot that feels too small, because the leather is stiff and the foot is numb. The fire is coaxed back to life. Coffee is boiled again. And even as his hands warm over the flame, he knows the truth he never says out loud. Tonight will come again. The same cold, the same damp wool, the same hard ground. And he will lie down again anyway, because that is what the work demands. And, somehow, what he has learned he can do. During one watch, when the wind has been steady for hours, and the stars feel like nails hammered into the sky, His thoughts begin to drift into stranger territory. It happens quietly. First, the herd's breathing becomes a single, slow sound. Then the prairie itself seems to breathe with it, and his mind, tired of counting circles, begins to fill the darkness with shapes. I don't know if you've ever stood in cold so deep it makes you feel detached from your own body, like you're watching yourself from a step away. That is the doorway. That is when old stories slip in. He thinks of a king he once heard about, told around a different fire, and yet the meaning was clear enough to sting. A man who sat at a table among gods. A man who thought his hunger would always be answered, and then the punishment. Water up to his knees, they said, clear enough to drink, and every time he bent down, every time his lips came close, the water slid away. Fruit above his head, heavy and ripe, grapes like dark beads, figs split at the seam, shining, and when he reached, when his fingers brushed leaf, the branches lifted, always a little more than his arm could follow. It is a simple torture, not knives, not fire, just nearness, just the endless almost. As he walks the herd's edge, he realizes how well winter understands that kind of punishment. You can smell coffee. You can feel the memory of a bed that isn't damp, and still, you cannot reach it for long. The moment you think you've captured comfort, it slides away, the way heat slides out through a seam in canvas. He stops for a moment and listens. A cow shifts. A hoof scuffs. A calf makes a small, questioning sound. All of it feels very far away, even though it is right there. He watches his breath hang in the air, then disappear, and thinks about how even breath cannot stay. He moves again, slow, steady, keeping the same path. Step, crunch, step, crunch. The sound becomes its own metronome, and in that repetition, the old story sharpens. He can almost see hands reaching, empty. He doesn't want to think about gods. Out here, gods feel too large, too indifferent. Still, he understands why the story survives, because it puts a name on a feeling every hungry, cold person has known. Want, reach, miss, want again. When his watch ends, he wakes the next man with a soft hand on the shoulder. He doesn't mention the story. He just returns to his bedroll. Inside the wool, the world narrows. Breath warms the air near his mouth. Somewhere, someone feeds the fire and embers brighten briefly, then settle. He closes his eyes, and as sleep finally thickens, it carries the image of water that will not be drunk, fruit that will not be held, and a quiet lesson whispered by winter itself, that the cruelest things are often the ones that stay close, close enough to see, and still out of reach by the smallest, merciless distance. He turns once inside the bedroll, careful, so the cold does not flood in all at once. Canvas crackles, wool shifts, heavy and familiar. He pulls the edge tighter under his ribs, a small act of defiance. For a few breaths, he listens only to the tent, breathing with the wind. In, out, a slow, steady pulse. Then his thoughts loosen. The herd becomes a distant murmur. The story of the hungry king fades into shadow. What remains is the simplest thing, warmth returning in a thin layer, and he lets that thin warmth carry him down. The winter wears down the edges of a man the way wind wears down a stone, not in one dramatic moment, more like a patient rubbing, night after night, until the sharp parts are gone and what remains is smooth enough to endure. By now, the crew moves like a single creature with many hands. No one needs to explain what comes next. The horses are tended first, always. Saddles lifted, cinches loosened, sweat-dark blankets pulled free and shaken until the frost dust lifts in a faint cloud. A hand runs down a leg, feeling for heat, for swelling, for the quiet warning of trouble. Hooves are picked clean, leather is checked, rope is coiled. Nothing fancy, just survival practiced until it looks like calm. They choose a spot the way you choose a place to lay your head when you've already accepted the ground will be hard. A shallow cut in the land where wind can't hit straight on. A low ridge that breaks the gusts into smaller teeth. A scatter of rocks that can become a wall. If there's water, they stay close enough to reach it, far enough to avoid the cold sink of the lowest ground. It's strange how a difference of 50 yards can feel like mercy. Up the slope, the air still bites, but it doesn't drown you. Wood is still scarce, so the fire is still small. A shallow pit when the soil allows. A ring of stones when it doesn't. Buffalo chips stacked like thin plates, dry and brittle, ready to smolder into a dull red heart that can be coaxed back to life at dawn. They guard their matches like secrets. One strike, one flare, then cupped hands and held breath, as if even the air might steal the flame. Coffee boils. The smell spreads, bitter and grounding. Tin cups pass hand to hand. The heat is brief but real, and for a moment you can see it change faces. Jaw unclenching, eyes softening, shoulders lowering by an inch. That long, Manoi. That little inch can feel like a whole warm room. Out here. Then darkness returns to claim the land. Inside the tent, if there is a tent, bodies settle along the edges like stones laid in a circle. Feet toward the center. Hats stay on. Bandanas stay at the throat. Belts loosen just enough to let the ribs expand. Boots, a choice every night. Some keep them on, stiff and ready, because the night can call for movement without warning. Some tuck them near the calves inside the bedroll, so the leather won't freeze into a shape that refuses a foot in the morning. No one judges. Everyone understands. Condensation begins its quiet work. Breath rises, warm and wet, meets the cold canvas, becomes frost. A thin skin of crystals forms above them, glittering faintly when the candle or firelight catches it. It's almost pretty, almost. And then you remember that those crystals will fall like snow the first time a shoulder bumps the wall, and the prettiness becomes just another problem. Sleep comes the way it always does now, not as rest, as a bargain. The first hour is the worst. The bedroll is cold at touch. Wool is damp. Canvas crackles. The body has to spend its own heat to warm what surrounds it, and that heat is precious. So, they lie still. They curl. They tuck hands under armpits. They breathe slow, trying to keep the mind quiet so the muscles don't tense and waste energy. You know that feeling, when you're trying to fall asleep but your thoughts keep flicking on like sparks. Out here, you learn to smother sparks before they become flame. Someone coughs. Someone snores. A horse shifts on the picket line, and the rope tightens with a soft, steady pull, then loosens, then tightens again. The sound becomes part of the night, like wind, like breathing, and the watch starts. A man is nudged awake, with a hand on the shoulder, and a name spoken low. No harshness, no drama, just duty passing from one tired body to another. He sits up, and cold rushes in where his warmth had been collecting. For a moment he hates the world, with a quiet, wordless hate, the kind that dissolves as soon as he stands. He stands anyway. He pulls his coat tighter, but the wind finds the seam where sleeve meets glove, and slides in like cold water. His breath comes out in pale bursts. Some of it freezes in the hairs of his mustache. Tiny needles that prickle when he licks his lips. The leather reins feel slick and stiff at once, as if they've forgotten how to bend. Even the horse seems quieter at night, ears turning toward sounds that a man can't place, nostrils tasting the dark. For a while, he just sits there, feeling the slow sway of the animal under him, listening to the soft grind of hooves on frozen grit. It's almost peaceful, until you remember that peace out here is just danger resting. Outside, the stars are hard and bright, sharpened by frozen air. The prairie is a wide blackness that feels bottomless. His boots crunch on frost. Each step makes a sound that seems too loud, like the night is listening for mistakes. He rides the edge of the herd, if there is a herd, slow and steady. If there isn't, he walks around camp, checking the horses, checking the fire's small glow, checking the darkness itself for any shape that doesn't belong. Sometimes he hums, not because he wants to sing, because a steady sound can calm cattle, and it can calm a man too. A thin line of rhythm to hold on to when the world is too empty. He sees strange things out here, or thinks he does. A pale drift that looks like a crouched animal until he comes closer. A line of shadow that looks like a man standing still until the starlight shifts. The mind plays tricks when it's tired, and the cold makes those tricks feel believable. I always feel la lung when that happens, because it reminds me how little it takes for the world to become haunted. Just darkness, wind, and a mind looking for patterns. Sometimes the trick becomes a memory. Not his own memory, but the kind of story that drifts around a fire like smoke. He thinks again of the hungry king from the old tale, the one punished with almost water and almost fruit. And he realizes the frontier has its own version. A man can look at a cabin from a mile away, a dark square promising shelter, and spend hours riding toward it, only to reach it and find it empty, cold, abandoned, the stove broken, the door hanging loose, shelter that exists and still cannot be used, warmth that is visible and still out of reach. The night is full of almosts. Almost enough wood, almost dry blankets, almost a full sleep, almost morning. By the time his watch ends, his eyelids feel heavy as saddle leather soaked and frozen. He wakes the next man with the same soft touch, returns to his bedroll, crawls back into damp wool that smells of smoke and old sweat and time. And for a few minutes, he feels something close to peace, because at least he is back inside the small pocket of warmth his body has built. Then the cold hour comes. It arrives before dawn, when the fire's glow is weakest, when the earth has finished giving up whatever small warmth it held from the day. The ground beneath the canvas feels like stone. The cold presses upward, steady, indifferent. Men who were sleeping wake, without wanting to, pulled up by a shiver that starts in the spine and ripples outward. Shivering is its own kind of cruelty. It demands energy when energy is already scarce. It keeps you awake when you need sleep. It makes your teeth click in the dark like tiny castanets. Some men curl tighter, some pull the blanket over their heads and breathe into that small cave of wool, making warm air for a moment, then dampness, then cold again. Some stare into the dark with eyes open, waiting for the first hint of gray. And while they wait, the stories creep closer. Not just Greek kings, frontier ghosts. A rider who froze on a night watch and was found in the morning sitting upright, rein still in hand, as if he'd decided to keep working even after his breath stopped. A man who walked away from camp to relieve himself and never came back, because the prairie at night has no landmarks, and a small circle of firelight can disappear behind you like it never existed. A herd that stampeded in the dark, hooves like thunder, and left the ground scarred in long gouges, a signature written by panic. They don't tell these stories loudly. They don't tell them to scare each other. They tell them because they are true enough to warn, and because naming a fear can make it smaller. Katlong Manoy, I think that's why people keep old myths alive too. A story is a candle. It doesn't change the size of the dark. It just gives your mind something to look at besides nothing. Finally, the sky begins to change. Not bright, just different. Black becomes charcoal. Charcoal becomes a deep gray that separates horizon from sky. The stars fade one by one, not falling, just retreating like shy animals stepping back into brush. Men stir. Canvas rustles. Someone coughs and spits into the cold. Boots are pulled on or tightened. A fire is coaxed back to life. A few chips nudged closer together. A breath blown gently over coals until they brighten, until heat appears again as a promise. Coffee returns. The day returns. Movement returns, and with it, the body's ability to make its own warmth again. The camp breaks quickly. Bedrolls rolled tight, canvas folded stiff, ropes tied with knots designed for numb fingers, horses saddled, cinch tightened. A final look around to make sure nothing is left behind except a cold, fire ring, and a few boot prints that the wind will erase. They ride out. And the strangest part is this: as they move, the night that felt endless becomes a memory that shrinks. The mind, warmed by motion, begins to treat it like something already survived. That is the frontier's spell. It makes suffering feel ordinary as soon as it's past, so you can do it again, day after day, night after night. There are nights when the work scatters the men, and one rider ends up at a line camp alone. A little cabin if he's lucky. More often, a low shelter of boards and old smoke, set into the lee of a hill. The door sticks in the frame. When he pulls it open, it gives a tired squeal, and the sound seems to travel far in the dark, like the land is taking note. Inside, the air is stale and cold, colder than outside for a breath or two. It smells of ash, damp wool, mouse droppings, and the faint sour tang of iron tools slowly rusting. He sets his saddle down with care anyway, because leather is his tomorrow. He lights a candle. The flame makes the walls jump. Knots in the wood look like eyes. Cracks look like mouths. He knows it's only wood, but a tired mind sees faces without permission. If there's a stove, it's an iron belly waiting, empty and gray. He feeds it with kindling, with chips, with whatever he can spare. The metal ticks as it wakes. Coffee boils on top, and the bubbling is loud in the small room, oddly comforting, like proof that time is moving. Then silence returns the moment he stops moving. No other breath, no other shifting in wool, just him. He keeps busy so loneliness doesn't grow teeth. A strap is mended. A bit of leather is oiled. A pencil scratches in a small notebook, not for poetry, just weather, miles. A note about a limping steer. The scratch of graphite is company. When he finally lies down, the boards beneath him are still cold, but less cruel than open ground. The stove gives off a low warmth until it dies, and even that warmth feels like an almost safe, almost enough. He closes his eyes and listens to the cabin settle. A pop of wood, a soft sigh of wind against the roof. In, out, and he lets the breath become the only thing that matters, because breath is something the winter cannot steal as long as it continues. Until, quietly, without announcement, the season begins to loosen its grip. One afternoon the wind still bites, but it smells different. Not sweet, not warm, just less sharp. The light lasts a little longer. The snow, if there is snow, softens at the edges. A thin trickle appears in a creek that had been silent under ice. They notice, not with celebration, just with a kind of cautious attention, like watching a dangerous animal turn its head away. That night, when they lie down, the bedroll still feels damp and heavy. The ground still feels hard. The wind still presses at the canvas, but the cold is not as deep. The shiver does not come as quickly. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, a man realizes he has been asleep for longer than he thought, a full hour, then another, unbroken. He wakes once, before dawn, and the darkness is still there, but it feels less cruel. He listens to the tent breathing with the wind and thinks, just for a moment, that maybe winter has finally begun to get tired too. The frost on the canvas above him loosens as the air shifts. A tiny glittering falls, soft as dust, landing on his cheek. He brushes it away and it melts into nothing, like a thought you almost remember. Spring does not arrive like a hero. It arrives like a thawing knot. At first, it's nothing you can point to, just the smallest change in the way the air sits on your skin. The wind still blows, but it loses its knife edge. The daylight stretches a few minutes longer, and those minutes feel like someone quietly slipped an extra blanket over the world. The men notice, without making a ceremony of it. Cowboys aren't built for speeches. They notice the way you notice a sore tooth finally easing by the sudden absence of constant pain. One evening, the ground, still hard, has a little give near the surface. Not much, but enough that a boot heel doesn't ring quite as sharply. Enough that a tent stake, if you drive it with patience, might bite an inch deeper than yesterday. Enough that the fire pit can be scraped out without the shovel skittering off like it hit stone. They make camp with the same routine, but the routine feels lighter. Hands still numb, wool still damp, canvas still stiff at night. Yet the dampness doesn't feel like a curse that will last forever. It feels like something that might finally dry. The creek near camp makes a sound again, not the groan of ice. A thin running, like a thread being pulled. Cold air still sinks into the low places, so they still sleep up the slope. But water moving is a different kind of cold. Living cold, not dead cold. They build the small fire, always small. They feed it buffalo chips, sagebrush, whatever the land offers. A low flame, a steady glow, a place to warm hands until fingers remember how to bend. Coffee again. The smell of it has become the smell of mornings and evenings, the smell of persistence. Tin cups warm palms, steam warms faces, and for a moment, the men look almost like people again, not just bodies doing work. That night, the tent, if there's a tent, doesn't frost as heavily. Breath still rises and condenses, but the crystals are thinner, less eager to form. The air is still cold enough to bite, but it doesn't clamp down. When a shoulder brushes the canvas, less snow falls from above. Sleep comes in longer pieces, not perfect, never perfect, but longer. A man wakes once, maybe twice, and when he shifts, the cold that rushes in is less shocking. He can tuck the edge of a blanket under his hip, seal the gap, and actually feel the warmth hold. It's a small thing, yet out here, small things are the whole story. In the darkest hour before dawn, he listens. No stampede, no desperate wind, just the steady chewing of a horse somewhere, the rope tightening and loosening. A distant owl, if the land has owls. A soft creak as the tent pole takes the weight of a turning gust. He thinks of the hungry king again, and he realizes something that feels almost kind. Tantalus was punished with nearness water at his prized. Lips, fruit at his fingertips, and no way to take them. The frontier punishes in the opposite way. It makes comfort far away. A ranch house might be a day's ride. A stove might exist, but not here. A bed might exist, but not for him. So the mind learns not to reach. It learns to hold what it has. A sip of coffee, a moment with hands near coals, a pocket of warmth inside wool, a breath that stays slow. Maybe that is how the day curse breaks. Not by receiving what you want, by shrinking what you want until it fits inside your hands. Morning comes. The sky turns from black to charcoal, then to a blue so pale it looks like it might shatter. The horizon becomes a line again. Shapes return. A horse's back, a saddle horn, a man's hat brim. Frost shines on grass tips like someone scattered salt. They rise. They move stiffly at first. Boots thump. Buckles click. Metal ticks as it warms. The fire is coaxed up, and the glow touches faces, the way a small kindness touches a tired person. Breakfast is simple, always simple. Beans, bacon, bread, if there is bread. The men eat without fuss, fuel. Then the day begins, and the days change. There is often one last storm that tries to prove winter still matters. It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It arrives as a change in pressure, a heaviness in the air, the way horses lift their heads and stare toward a horizon you can't read yet. Clouds gather like bruises. The light turns flat. The wind shifts, and suddenly the cold has its old taste again, sharp as metal. They make camp early when they can, because experience teaches a man to respect the sky. The ground is half thawed now, not soft, not friendly, but softer. Boot prints sink slightly instead of skittering. Mud clings to heels. Each step makes a wet, sucking sound that feels slow, like the earth doesn't want to let go. It's tiring in a different way than frozen ground, heavy rather than hard. They choose a spot with drainage because mud is worse than cold when it comes to bedding. A slight slope, a place where water will run past instead of pooling. They clear stones anyway, because even in spring, a fist-sized rock under a hip can turn an hour into an eternity. The fire is harder to start when air is wet. Tinder that would have caught instantly in dry cold now hesitates, smolders, threatens to die. A match flares. Hands cup around the flame. Breath is held. Then, finally, it takes. A small orange tongue licking at chips. A low, steady burn. Rain comes as a fine needle at first. Then it thickens. Sleet, wet snow. It taps the tent, like fingers, patient, insistent. Outside, the world becomes a blur of gray and movement. Inside, they shrink. Wool grows heavier with damp. Smoke clings to everything. Condensation returns as droplets that gather and fall, one by one, onto blankets with a soft, mean tap. A man turns his face away from the drip line, tucks his hat brim lower, pulls the bandana up over his mouth, so the air he breathes is a little warmer. When the watch comes, it feels cruel again. A hand on the shoulder, a name. A man sits up, and the warmth he fought to build leaks out in seconds. He forces his boots on soft now, soaked and heavy, and steps outside into rain that hits his face cold and clean. Out in the open, the herd huddles, heads down, backs to the wind. Cattle hate wet cold more than dry cold. So does a man. He rides slow circles, humming under his breath. Not a song meant to be heard, just a thread of sound to keep the mind from unraveling. Rain beads on his hat brim, then runs down in steady drips. Water finds the gap at his collar. He shivers once, then stops, because shivering wastes energy, and energy is warmth. Hours pass. The storm moves on, the way storms do, indifferent. By the time he wakes the next man, the rain has softened into mist. The wind eases. A pale, exhausted, quiet settles. Morning after a storm is always strange. The air is clean. Everything glistens. Ropes and buckles are outlined with tiny drops. A man steps out, and the smell hits him: wet earth, crushed grass, smoke that went out too soon. He rebuilds the fire, and the first heat feels like a personal favor. This is when drying becomes possible again. They spread blankets over saddles, over ropes, over bushes if there are bushes. Wool hangs heavy at first, sagging with moisture. It drips. Then the sun finds a gap in the clouds and touches the fabric. Steam rises in thin, ghostly sheets. Not much, but enough to make a man believe dryness is not a myth. By afternoon, the ground begins to firm again as moisture evaporates. Mud crusts. Boots pick up less weight. Horses lift their feet more easily. The landscape feels as if it is shaking itself awake, slowly, reluctantly, but waking. And that's when the strangest thing happens. The memory of winter begins to loosen. Not gone, never gone. But it stops sitting on the chest like a weight. It becomes a story you can tell without tasting. Cold in your mouth. Men talk a little more. A joke, dry as the prairie. A comment about the smell of thawing ground. A simple observation. Sun's got some strength today. Small words, like small fires, enough to make the evening feel less empty. The snow line retreats. Drifts shrink. Mud appears where frost had sealed the earth. Mud is its own misery, heavy and sucking, clinging to boots and hooves. But mud is also proof that the ground is waking. A man rides through it and feels the horse's muscles working beneath him, and he thinks, Lalung Thut. Even the worst conditions can feel like relief when they mean winter is ending. There's more sound now. A creek that gurgles louder. A bird call. The soft tearing sound of grass being pulled up fresh. Instead of scraped dry, the world is not quiet. The same way. Work continues, of course. It always does. Fences still need checking. Cattle still need watching. But the work has a different shape when a man no longer spends every night fighting for warmth. One afternoon, they reach an old cabin, abandoned, half-collapsed, roof sagging. They step inside and find a fire ring, old soot, and a scrap of canvas left behind years ago. The place smells of dust and mouse nests and ancient smoke, a kind of museum made by time. They don't stay long. But for a moment, standing in that broken shelter, each man feels the presence of other winters, other men. It's a strange companionship. Reaching backward, I always feel a quiet sadness in places like that, because you can almost hear the conversations that once happened there, and then you remember those voices are gone. The wind keeps talking, though. The wind is the only storyteller that never sleeps. That night, back in camp, one of the men says something simple. Not a speech, just a sentence. Feels like it might break soon. No one answers right away. They just nod, as if agreement should be silent. They roll their bedrolls, still heavy, still smelling of smoke and wool. But the smell now feels familiar, not oppressive. It's the smell of a season lived through, a season survived. Later, when the fire has settled to coals, one man stretches his legs toward it and watches the red glow. The coals pulse softly, like a heart. He thinks about all the nights behind him, the nights when the ground felt like ice under his spine, when shivering stole his sleep, when the dark felt so big it could swallow him. He thinks of the myths, too, the old punishments, the old curses. And then he thinks of something plain, something human. He thinks of the first warm room he will enter. Not the luxury of it, just the fact of it. A door that shuts, a wall that holds wind back completely, a bed that doesn't press rocks into his hip, a blanket that is dry. The thought is so simple it hurts a little. He doesn't chase it. He lets it pass, like a cloud drifting over stars. Because he has learned what the winter taught him. Reach too hard and you suffer. Hold softly and you endure. So he returns to the present, to the smell of smoke, to the faint horse, scent in the air, to the slow sounds of camp, settling, to breath. Later, after supper, he steps away from the fire for a moment and stands alone. Not far, just far enough that the glow is behind him and the prairie is in front of him again. The sky is clearer now, washed by the storm, and the stars look less harsh, more like distant lanterns than needles. He can smell something new in the wind. Not flowers, too early for that, but damp soil, the clean scent of grass, beginning to think about growing. Somewhere in the dark, a tiny sound repeats, soft and patient. Maybe water slipping over stones. Maybe the first insect daring to sing. He listens until his shoulders drop without him deciding to, and he realizes, with a quiet surprise, that the night is no longer only an enemy. It is also a room, a wide room, where he can simply stand and be. He comes back to the bedroll, carrying that feeling like a coal cupped carefully in his hands. In, out, in, out. If you are listening right now, I want you to take that breath with him. Not forced, not perfect, Just slow enough that your shoulders can drop, slow enough that your jaw can loosen, slow enough that the space behind your eyes can soften. Imagine the tent canvas above you, the way it moves gently with wind. Imagine the fire's last glow, dim and safe. Imagine the stars fading, not because they are gone, but because morning always arrives eventually. Let your thoughts do what cattle do when the storm passes. Settle. Stop running in circles. Lower the head. Chew slowly on whatever is left, until even that becomes quiet. And if there is anything in your own day that felt like an almost enough, almost safe, almost calm, let it be small. Let it fit in your hands. Let it be a cup of warm coffee, a quiet room, a soft exhale. The frontier night finally ends the way it always ends, not with triumph, with light. And the man, having endured the long dark, lets his eyes close again, not in fear, not in tension, but in the simple trust that he has made it to another morning. Good night.